Welcome back to Silent Paws and Brave Hearts. The rain came down hard that night, the kind of rain that does not merely fall, but attacks. It hammered the pavement of the small apartment complex on the east side of Glenbrook, Colorado, bouncing off the concrete in silver sheets, flooding the gutters, turning the parking lot into a shallow river of cold, indifferent water. And in the middle of all of it stood a woman and her son. Olivia Mercer, 34 years old, stood barefoot on the wet pavement. She had not had time for shoes. The landlord had not given her time for anything. Her belongings, what little she had managed to keep over 3 years of quiet, grinding poverty, were scattered around her in soaking cardboard boxes and black garbage bags. A child's backpack, a framed photograph face down in a puddle, a small lamp without its shade lying on its side like something that had simply given up. She stood very still, not because she was calm, but because she had passed the place where tears come easily and had arrived somewhere much further and much colder than that. Beside her, pressed against her left hip, was her son, Ethan. He was 8 years old. He had his mother's dark eyes and his father's quiet jaw, and he was trying, with everything inside his small body, not to cry. He had decided, in the way the children sometimes decide things without anyone telling them, that his mother needed him to be strong tonight. So he stood straight. His small hand found hers in the dark, and he held on. The landlord had already gone back inside. The door had closed with a sharp, final click. Nobody else came out. The neighboring windows glowed faintly, curtains drawn, the world inside warm and dry and looking the other way. Down the road, moving slowly through the rain-blurred dark, a pair of headlights appeared. Daniel Carter was not in the habit of driving slowly. He was not, if he was being truthful with himself, in the habit of paying much attention to the edges of other people's lives. 47 years old, broad-shouldered, with the kind of face that had seen enough of the world to stop being surprised by it. He had served 22 years in the United States Army. He had walked through places that do not appear on tourist maps. He had carried men who could no longer carry themselves. And then, one day, he had come home, and home had felt like a foreign country. Now, he lived alone in a log cabin 20 minutes outside of town, tucked against the base of the mountains, where the only sounds at night were wind, pine trees, and the slow breathing of the dog asleep at the foot of his bed. Ghost. The dog rode in the passenger seat tonight, as he always did. A Belgian Malinois, 9 years old, with a silver-black coat that shimmered faintly in the glow of passing streetlights. His ears were large and attentive. His eyes, amber and ancient and deeply calm, missed almost nothing. He had served 6 years in active military duty alongside Daniel, detecting explosives, tracking insurgents through mountain passes, moving through danger with a silence and a grace that had saved lives more than once. His muzzle was graying now. There was a long, pale scar along his left shoulder where shrapnel had kissed him years ago in a country far from here. In retirement, Ghost had become something quieter, gentler, but no less alert. Daniel had learned across years and across continents to trust this dog absolutely. Which is why, when Ghost suddenly rose from his seat and pressed both front paws against the passenger window, a low, urgent sound rising from deep in his chest, Daniel did not ignore it. Ghost. Daniel's voice was low and steady. Easy. But Ghost did not ease. He pressed harder against the glass, his breath fogging it in rapid, anxious bursts. His eyes were locked on something in the darkness to the right. His whole body trembled, not with fear, but with the particular electric urgency of a working dog who has identified something that cannot be walked past.
Daniel slowed the truck. He looked to the right, and he saw them. He pulled over without fully deciding to. The truck rolled to a stop at the curb, and Daniel sat for a moment, engine idling, rain hammering the roof, looking through the windshield at the woman and the boy standing in the ruins of their evening. Ghost whimpered once, just once, soft and low, like a question. Daniel exhaled slowly. He reached for his jacket on the back seat, pushed open the door, and stepped out into the rain. He walked toward them slowly, hands visible, the way a man learns to approach frightened people when he has seen what fear can make them do.
"Ma'am." His voice was quiet, but it carried even over the rain. "What happened here?" Olivia looked at him. Her eyes were dry. That was the thing that struck him first. After everything, her eyes were dry. "We were evicted," she said simply, as if the plainness of the words could protect her from the size of the reality behind them. "Tonight? In this?" He gestured at the rain and at her bare feet and at the soaking boxes around her. "He didn't wait for the weather," she said. Daniel looked down at the boy. Ethan looked back at him, chin up, eyes steady, trying so hard to appear unafraid that the effort of it was the saddest thing Daniel had seen in a long time. Ghost had followed Daniel out of the truck. Now he stood beside Daniel, calm and quiet, and he looked at Ethan with those ancient amber eyes. And then he did something slow and deliberate. He stepped forward, lowered his great silver-black head, and pressed his nose gently against the boy's cheek. Ethan's composure broke. Not loudly, there was no wailing, just a single shuddering breath, and then the boy buried his face in Ghost's fur, and his small shoulders shook, and Ghost stood perfectly still and let him. Did not flinch, did not pull back, just held the weight of the child's grief with the quiet steadiness of something ancient and good. Olivia watched this and pressed one hand over her mouth. Daniel watched this and felt something shift in his chest, something old and sealed. He turned toward the apartment building. He walked to the landlord's door and knocked 3 times. When the man opened it, he found a 47-year-old veteran standing in the rain with an expression that required no interpretation. The conversation was brief. Daniel returned to Olivia. "You're not sleeping in this rain," he said simply. "I have a cabin. It's warm, there's space, you don't have to be afraid." He paused. "Ghost doesn't take to people lightly. He chose your son. That's enough for me." Olivia looked at the dog, still pressed gently against Ethan's side. She looked at this quiet, serious stranger who had stopped his truck in a storm for people he did not know. "Okay," she whispered. "Thank you." The cabin held the smell of pine wood and wood smoke and old coffee. And when Olivia and Ethan stepped through the door, they both went still for a moment, the way cold, frightened people do when warmth finally reaches them and they are not sure they deserve it. Daniel built the fire up without ceremony. He found dry socks for Ethan and a large flannel shirt for Olivia, and he warmed soup on the stove and said very little because he understood that words were not what they needed most right now. He had sat with enough broken people to know that sometimes the kindest thing you can offer is simply a warm room and the absence of expectation. Ghost moved through the cabin like a silent guardian, checking each corner, then settling on the rug near Ethan, who had wrapped himself in a blanket and was already growing heavy-lidded in the firelight. The dog rested his chin on the boy's knee, and Ethan's small hand moved instinctively to rest on Ghost's head. And just like that, both of them were still. Olivia sat across the table from Daniel, cradling a mug of soup with both hands. She had not eaten, he guessed, since morning. "You don't have to explain anything tonight," Daniel said. "I know." She looked up. "But I think I need to." She paused, gathering herself. "My husband was in the army. He passed away 4 years ago, overseas." Her voice held steady, but just barely. "His name was Michael, Michael Mercer. The cabin went very quiet. Daniel did not move, not a single muscle. He sat as still as a man who has just been struck by something invisible and enormous. Michael Mercer, he repeated. The name came out carefully, like something fragile being carried across a long distance. Across the room, Ghost lifted his head. He rose slowly and walked to Olivia. He stood before her, those amber eyes soft and intent, and then he did something that made the air leave Daniel's lungs entirely. He pressed his nose gently into her open palm, then lowered his chin and rested it there, warm, still, tender. It was a gesture Daniel had seen only once before in his life. Michael had spent months teaching his own canine years ago to do exactly that, a gesture of comfort, of recognition, of "I see you and you are not alone." Daniel's jaw tightened, his eyes burned. "Ghost," he said softly, and his voice was not entirely steady. "Where did you learn that?"
But he already knew. He had always believed that dogs carry the imprints of the people who love them, that something of a person lives on in the animals they shaped. And in this moment, watching Ghost rest his chin in the palm of Michael Mercer's widow, Daniel Carter believed it with his whole heart. "I served with Michael," Daniel said quietly. Olivia looked up. "He was my closest friend," Daniel continued. The words came slowly, pulled up from a place he had kept sealed for 4 years. "He talked about you. Every day, it seemed like. He talked about Ethan. He made me promise." He stopped, cleared his throat. "He made me promise that if anything ever happened to him, I would find you, make sure you were all right." He looked down at his hands. "I failed that promise. I told myself I didn't know where you were, but the truth was, I was afraid of what I'd find, of what it would mean to face his family and admit that he wasn't coming home." The fire crackled. Rain tapped softly against the dark windows. Olivia's eyes filled, and this time she did not stop the tears. They came quietly, the way grief comes when it has finally been given permission. "You're here now," she whispered. Over the following days, the story came out in pieces, slowly, like stones lifted from a riverbed. A trusted uncle had offered to manage Michael's life insurance and savings after his death, a man Olivia had loved and believed in completely. Over 2 years he had drained every account. When she discovered the truth, the shame was so crushing that she had told no one. She believed she had failed Michael's sacrifice by being foolish enough to trust the wrong person. She had spent the last 1.5 years trying to keep herself and Ethan afloat on almost nothing, and she had been losing. Daniel listened to all of it. He did not interrupt. He did not offer hollow comfort. He simply listened, the way soldiers learn to listen, with their whole body, absorbing every word. When she finished, Ghost, who had been lying at her feet the entire time, rose and pushed his great head gently into her hands. She held his face in both palms and looked into his amber eyes, and something in her seemed to release, quietly, like a breath held for too long. "This isn't over. Not even close."
He made calls. He reached out to the network of veterans he had kept at arm's length for years, men and women who answered anyway, because that is what they do. A veteran attorney named Robert Hale, steady and formidable, took the case without hesitation. But without documentation, he cautioned, the road would be difficult. It was Ghost who found the way.
While Daniel was moving Olivia's belongings into the spare room, Ghost paused near a battered cardboard box that had been shoved beneath the bed. He lowered his nose to it, inhaled slowly, and then sat, alert, perfectly still. The trained signal of a dog who has found something significant. Daniel knelt beside him. He opened the box. Inside, beneath old letters and a folded flag, were documents, bank statements, a copy of the original insurance policy, a letter from the uncle requesting transfer of funds, signed and dated. Everything Robert Hale needed. Daniel sat back on his heels and looked at Ghost. Ghost looked back at him with those ancient, patient eyes. "Good boy," Daniel said softly, and his voice broke on the second word, and he did not try to stop it. The case moved with the quiet, unstoppable momentum of justice long overdue. Robert Hale was precise and relentless. The uncle had no answer for the documents. Within 3 months, Olivia recovered the full amount of what had been stolen, and the man who had stolen it faced consequences that Michael Mercer, had he been there, would have considered appropriate. The veteran community did not stop there. They helped Olivia find a small home in a safe neighborhood. They painted it. They filled it with furniture. They showed up on a Saturday morning with food and tools, and the particular generosity of people who have seen enough of the world's darkness to be fiercely committed to creating light where they can. Ethan ran through the yard with Ghost bounding beside him, the old dog moving with a looseness and joy that Daniel had not seen in years. The boy laughed, clear and unguarded, and the sound of it carried through the warm afternoon air like something returned from a great distance. Olivia stood on the porch of her new home, watching her son, and Daniel stood beside her. "He would have loved this," she said softly. "He does," Daniel said, and he meant it.
That evening, Daniel sat alone on his cabin porch for the first time in what felt like years without the familiar heaviness in his chest. The mountains stood dark and quiet against a sky full of stars. The rain was long gone. The air was clean and cold and still. Ghost came and sat beside him. The old dog pressed his warm, solid weight against Daniel's leg and rested his gray muzzle on Daniel's knee. His amber eyes looked out at the mountains for a moment, and then they closed. His breathing slowed, deep and peaceful, and he exhaled a long, slow breath, as though he too had been carrying something heavy and had finally been given permission to set it down. Daniel looked at him for a long moment. His hand moved to rest on the dog's silver-black head. He felt the warmth of him, the steadiness, the faithful, wordless presence that had walked beside him through the worst years of his life, and had, on one rainy night on a dark Colorado street, led him back to the only promise that had ever truly mattered. "Thank you," Daniel said quietly. His voice was barely above a whisper. His eyes were wet, and he did not wipe them. He sat with them, with the grief and the gratitude and the profound, quiet relief of a man who has finally come home. The stars did not answer. The mountains did not answer. But Ghost's tail moved once, slow and warm against the porch boards, and somehow that was enough. Sometimes the bravest thing a heart can do is find its way back to a promise it was too afraid to keep. And sometimes the one who leads you there does not speak a single word. He walks beside you, listens to your heartbeat, and knows the way home before you do. Ghost did not need words. He never had. He only needed to be trusted. And Daniel Carter, after years of silence and shadow, had finally learned to do exactly that. If this story touched your heart,
If it reminded you of someone you love, someone you have lost, or a promise you are still carrying, please take a moment to subscribe to Silent Paws and Brave Hearts. Every story on this channel is written for you, for the quiet heroes, for the loyal hearts, for everyone who has ever loved deeply and lost greatly and kept going anyway. Hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell so you never miss a story that was made with your heart in mind. Until next time, remember, the most faithful love does not always come with a voice. Sometimes it comes on 4 legs in the middle of a storm, and it changes everything. This is Silent Paws and Brave Hearts, and we are so glad you are here.